Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where I feature top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And today's episode is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, and implement processes and procedures so businesses can grow and thrive. And today's guest is Adam, and I'm going to pronounce your last name correctly because you spelled it for me, Radulovic. How did I do?
Perfect.
Awesome.
That's
okay.
perfect.
Adam Radulovic, and you are the founder of XL.net, and we're going to talk about that. But first of all, we have to give a big shout out to Jeremy Wise, Dr. Jeremy Wise from Rise 25, who introduced us. I mean, who else? I mean, the best introductions that I've gotten is from the team at Rise 25. Great team. They produce my podcast. I've been doing it now for over 3 years. All 6 episodes. Every month I have 6 episodes. They produce it. And big shout out to them. So thank you, Jeremy, for this introduction as well. So Adam, tell us about XL.net.
Sure. XL.net is an IT firm that caters to companies that need to reduce the noise the technology can bring to their environment. We have about 40 employees, been around about 14, 15 years now, and headquartered in Chicago, Illinois.
Cool. So what does it mean to reduce the noise? Give me an example.
I'm so glad you asked. In IT, many of the problems that people experience can be prevented with some proactive maintenance and trying to anticipate those problems from happening in the first place. The way you do it is you have regular monthly audits of technology to look for those signs that could be problems in the future, and you prevent them today.
Cool. So what will be some problems that people can have in the future that they need to be prevented today? Give me some examples.
Sure. We'll do some simple things. Like, let's say their network equipment is connected to a battery backup unit. Well, that battery backup unit needs to be tested regularly. So in the case that there's a power outage and you need to rely on it, you're able to have a functioning battery backup. And there's hundreds of small examples like that. When you combine it all together, about 80% of problems most people experience in technology are easily preventable.
Absolutely. I think it's true in everything in life, right? I mean, if you anticipate ahead of time and you protect and you do the actions, then you can actually prevent it. So why not IT, especially when it's so crucial for the continuity of the business?
Absolutely. And I don't know why more IT firms don't do the same. My only guess is that operationally, it's very hard to manage an IT firm that does that type of service. Yes,
it definitely sounds that way, but you have it, you definitely mastered running your company. I mean, you run on EOS, you documented all your processes and procedures, you use Suite Process, which, you know what, I'm going to actually include in the show notes. One of my first podcasts that I interviewed Owen, a good friend of mine. He's the owner of
Small World.
Process. Absolutely, I know, right? So a big shout out to Owen as well. So I'm going to actually include it in the show notes because we did a great episode about Suite Process. So let's talk about document. I mean, you accomplished that. You documented your processes and procedures. You have a super organized operation, and that's probably where you can provide that very important service that other companies cannot, is you have it down. You basically have your processes. Did you always have processes in your company?
Of course not.
Good. That was like a trick question, but you answered it correctly. Good. So let's look at the before and after, okay?
Sure.
So first of all, what triggered you, or what got you to want to document your processes and procedures?
It happened relatively early in our cycle. Very early on, when you start a company, everything needs to be done. There's really an open ocean of things to do, and you try to focus where you can, but a lot of your day is reactive. It's just dealing with what's coming in, and you never feel like you have the time to address it. As you grow from 1 to 2 to 3 employees, it starts becoming less manageable to have that tribal knowledge of how to handle different issues. By the time we hit 4 or 5 employees is when we began documenting our processes and procedures. But we took the wrong route initially. So initially we went through and documented every procedure that we could think of. But when I say we, it was predominantly me documenting a lot of the procedures. And it worked okay. For the first 50, 60, 100 procedures, I was able to document and keep it up to date. But as it grew a life of its own, we got to hundreds of policies and procedures, and I was predominantly the one that was maintaining it all while running the company. And at one point, I could no longer manage all the procedures. So what happened was that the Excel netters that relied on those procedures, when they would go and try to use them, they saw they were dated. And culturally, it went from a process and governance-driven organization to back to tribal because of all that governance being aged. People stopped using it.
You know, I'm going to stop you there, Adam, because this is a really important point. And I always tell my clients, and I'm glad you brought it up, because it's enough that one procedure will be obsolete or dated or not longer valid, that then it makes you doubt the rest, because you go, well, if this is not valid, maybe the rest are not either. And then you just drop it, and all the effort and all the work that you put in documentation actually goes to pieces because nobody uses it anymore.
And that's what happened. You know, our policy or governance or process muscles just died. Now, recognized after it died, and we recognized why it died, but we weren't certain how to solve it. Went back and forth. Do we hire an internal governance person that just manages governance? We decided that that's probably not the right approach, because it ultimately have the same end that it did with just me managing it. It would just come at a later date. And we came to the conclusion that every Excel netter needs to be part of authoring governance, updating governance. We decided to dump our previous system, which is really a wiki of governance, migrate to Suite Process. But along with that migration, we trained every single Excel netter on authoring governance. So that re-implementation, we ensured that 100% of people were comfortable authoring it. We continued it to this day. And I think that shift to making everybody part of that process is what has gotten to such a healthy spot with running on governance.
I completely agree with you. I mean, that is how we approach a project, is involve the team. I mean, actually, Owen and I did several from Suite Process. We've done several webinars together, and we're outlined the process on how to document. And one of the key components is involve the team. Don't just do it by one person. It just doesn't work, because you need to get the buy-in from the entire team, and everybody has to be involved, and it has to be the labor of love of everyone, so that nobody's gonna not use it, right? So now that you have it, what would you say are the top benefits of having well-documented processes and procedures?
As a company, we deliver predictable results to our clients and to Excel netters. That's just to kind of summarize it.
And externally.
Correct.
Good. So let's talk about internally, because, think about it. The people that are listening to us right now are entrepreneurs, just like yourself, just like myself, but they don't have processes, or maybe they do, and they're in the same situation where they're not updated, right? Or they are starting on this journey, or whatever phase they are in, right? So consistent results, that sounds amazing. But let's talk about internally, what changes did do you see between the before and after in terms of when you have well-documented processes?
The ambiguity of how we do something is gone. We certainly still come in situations where, oh my God, we don't have governance for X, whatever that is. We document it at that point and together figure out how we should handle something. So it gets institutionalized after that. You know, it's even hard just going back to not having it. I think everyone just did their own methods that they can think of. Maybe some knowledge of how to do something was tribally transferred between people. It was unpredictable. Probably just a summary word. Everything was just much more unpredictable and harder to manage.
For sure, you know, and it really aligns also with what you do for your clients, because you are trying to avoid the unpredictable in terms of the IT and the software. I mean, you know, the IT, the networks, etc. And it's basically by having well-documented processes on how to do things, you're actually paving the road to future outcomes without a lot of surprises or ambiguity or unknown, right?
And another area that it's really shortened the cycle of onboarding new Excel letters. When they come in, we can assign them for their particular role all the relevant governance they have to be familiar with. Previously, that was done by the buddy training system where, all right, you sit next to one person and they're going to be your buddy for X number of months until that tribal knowledge seeps into you through osmosis. Now we're finding when we bring in Excel letters, it's I think a lot smoother ride for everybody.
Absolutely. Can you quantify that? Like how much do you think, how much time or what percentage of shorter time, or like how can you quantify it in terms of man hours, in terms of dollars, however you want to quantify them, or satisfaction, retaining, whatever it is, like how would you quantify having processes as opposed to not having processes in onboarding, in mistakes, like decreasing mistakes, etc.? How would you quantify it?
Our retention, client retention went up by 8% overall, which is a lot. Our employee retention, and that's the right fit employee retention, that increased as well. I don't have the actual number. I just see that it went up.
I mean, if you had to evaluate, what would you think it is?
The change in employee retention?
Yeah.
We had relatively high before. So we probably went from 90s to 95, 96%, even in employee retention. Employee engagement improved, and measured that quarterly. That went up about 12%.
Wow.
And as you can imagine, like knowing what your job is and how to do your role is a lot more engaging than not knowing it, having to discover and make mistakes and having people tell you, oh, that's not how you do it. This is how we do it here. Onboarding new employees, that was a little tougher. I don't think the timeline changed. The competency of the Excel letter that joins changed. That time to having to be fully effective in their role, and that got cut in half.
Wow. So 50% improve on the time. That's amazing. I mean, you know, it also allows you to hire faster, like, you know, hire for the culture, hire, and, you know, if the employee doesn't work out, then it's, you know, they depart, you made them depart, whatever it is, but you're not that, it's not such a problem to bring on somebody new. So those are great statistics. Now, you know, we all know that we can document processes and procedures, but the key is to make sure that they're being followed by all. So what are some points that you can share with us on how you were able to ensure that your processes and procedures and policies are being followed by all?
Sure. Great question. And this probably, I don't know if it's going to be effective for others, but I'll tell you how we converted to being very process-driven organization, followed by all. When we realized that wiki model fell apart and lost that culture of following process procedure, when we decided to move to suite process and have everybody be part of it, we started with the initial policy. We call it documentation commandments. It's draconian, but documentation commandments say that anything that you do must be an existing process, and if the process doesn't exist, you need to be the first to create that process. If you don't, you'll be written up and potentially terminated. It's very strong language. We never terminate anybody because of it, but it was that serious for the company's survival that we all needed to change, and change quickly. And I think that served just as a message from the top of the company that says, this is something we have to do. We can't avoid this any longer. We can't survive anymore without it.
You know, it's funny because I do this lecture, right? I have a workshop that is called How to Make Sure That Your Processes Are Followed by All. And the number one slide, like it's 8 steps, and the number one slide, the number one step is mindset. And I talked to entrepreneurs and I said, you know, it's your mindset. If you do not drive this project and you don't have that mindset that this is super important, you lead by example and you enforce it in the company, it's just that project is going to fail. So I'm glad you're saying that. We didn't coordinate on that, but that's exactly the number one in being like thing that needs to be done in order for processes to be followed by all.
And it's a painful process to get to that step, but once you decide it, once we said enough is enough, and we're gonna be a process-driven organization, and that was communicated, it was much easier after that. I don't think we had the cultural issues they expected from it, because I assumed, well, people hate documenting what they do. They're not going to want to do it. What we found was that people are more engaged after that, because now that ambiguity is gone, they have less risk of trying to make decisions on how to do this brand new thing that they've never seen or hasn't been documented. So that it took a lot of pain to get to the point where we drew the line. So if I could tell the other entrepreneurs that they're going this journey what to do, just do it a lot sooner. You don't have to go through the pain before you decide that.
I agree. You know, and I hear a lot, or I hear, you know, the comment of, I don't want to document, or I don't want to make my people document because I feel like we're going to lose the creativity, or it's not going to be as much fun, or there is no room to create, which I don't agree, because I think it's the opposite. It gives you more room to create. But from your perspective, do you feel like there was any loss of creativity, or did you become this like robotic organization, or do you feel like your staff were all of a sudden were like, only do this, and became very narrow-minded?
I can absolutely empathize that I had the same assumption. This is going to just be create all of us into robots, and people are going to hate it, and it's going to be like 1984. It didn't turn out that way. It allowed to grow our creativity by starting foundations and then building upon it, which is hard when you have to keep all the ideas in your mind. Until you document it, it's really hard to build on it. So I think you have much richer application of creativity than you can without documenting.
Absolutely. All right. So any other points in terms of like, how do you ensure that you are a process-driven organization? Yeah, you have what you did in the beginning, but how do you actually make it a continual thing and enforce that? Not enforce, encourage, lead by example, whatever you want to call it, but how do you continue that followed by all?
The documentation commandments. So everybody in the leadership team and even all the Excel netters, if there's a process that's not documented, it doesn't require a leadership team member to raise their hand. Like anyone in the company raise their hand, says we need to document that. So what we do is the expectation from your Excel netter is that other Excel netters are also following process, and they call out when that doesn't happen. There is an extra step that we had to implement and that's the review of governance. So when we went and deployed this throughout XLNet, initially with Suite Process, our governance writing just started going through the roof. There were left and right daily new procedures and policies. And it was hard to go through and approve them all and just read everything that was coming through. At some point, there's too many of them. We started almost having, I started getting worried that the same thing might happen. We're going to have too much governance. And we started getting duplicate policies and procedures because some people couldn't find them. And so they created brand new ones. Some of them are very similar. So we implemented a process that every department now follows. Every department for their subset of governance does a quarterly meeting or review governance. And we go through policies, then processes, then procedures, and review anything that, and we said it really a Suite process, anything that's over a year old, that department reviews it. And that's allowed us to simplify, define duplication. In fact, we just had leadership teams today. We again found duplication. It just kind of gets into the system and opportunities to consolidate. And it's that, I think, pruning process that's making this still a very relevant system for us.
Love it. Absolutely. I'm a big proponent of quarterly reviews, doing exactly the same. And what we do is, like at the beginning, we process map everything, right, in order to create a blueprint. Because I look at it as design, documentation, and implementation. And when we go into a company, we want to design first, like in terms of like, how are we going to build, if we use Suite Process, how are we going to build it? Because right now, for instance, we're doing a project where we are working with a company that already had Suite Process, but everything is just everything, like you mentioned, a lot of documentation, but we can't find it, right? So the first thing is we organize it. We put it in what I call different bins, right? So this belongs to marketing, this belongs to HR, this belongs to operations. Within operations, just like sticky notes on a whiteboard to understand where it goes. And then we have a master index, so to avoid exactly what you were talking about. But what you're doing is perfect. And then we still have the quarterly reviews to make sure that's the only way you can make it so it's alive, right? So it kept alive, that it's breathing, living documentations that are not going to go obsolete and everybody uses them. Wow, Adam, this has been like a great conversation. You're like ideal poster child for a company that has processes and procedures. If people want to hear more about your services, about you, ask you any questions, where should they how can they find you?
XL.net.
That's simple,
so
XL.net.
2 letters, X like extra large, XL.net. And it's my first name, Adam at XL.net, if you want to email me.
Fantastic. Well, Adam, thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast. It's been a great conversation about processes and procedures. And basically, I think we covered how to create a process-driven company. I mean, that was definitely what we talked about, and a lot of information. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. And I hope those listening, that this will make their journey a little less painful than mine was.
Amen to that. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.